What is up everyone, it's Moolah Please today with my video on trio landing spots that I believe will be viable. So let's get started. And firstly I want to address how I think the game is going to change from duos to trios. I believe that the first major thing is that areas that rely a lot on quad crashes to rotate, such as Junk Junction, are simply not going to be as good because of the fact that with quad flying, obviously since it's a two-person vehicle and it's not as controlled as like planes or ballers, then you might be isolated from your teammates. So unless you're pretty confident in your quad flying skills, I definitely wouldn't recommend it since it's kind of a risk. Also, I don't think that many baller places other than this hangar north of Pressure Plant and Frosty Flights are going to be too viable, since landing for other baller spawns are kind of a gamble. I believe that this one north of Happy can be combined with the racetrack here to loot this area, but that's also dependent on bus path, since I think the only way it'd be viable is if you can line up your drop for both areas so that your entire trio can have a chance at getting a baller. Next thing is that areas that struggle to supply even a duo are definitely just not going to be as viable, so I don't think that teams will risk landing there. Places like Tomato Temple and Mini Junk, for example, I don't think are going to have too many teams since it's just not a viable game plan for those trios. Therefore, the way that I chose these landing spots was primarily based off, firstly, the amount of loot you can get, so each of these landing areas is going to have at least 20 chests. Next, that you can get at least 2 kinds of materials maxed out and will have access to a third, the last type, nearby. And also that there's constant mobility or a nearby slipstream. Constant mobility being defined as pretty much like the vents or zipline system that's been implemented, but for the most part it's mostly going to be focused on slipstreams and vents. So now that that's done, let's get started on drops. The first one I want to talk about is Pressure Plant. I think Pressure Plant's going to be really strong since it has max metal and pretty efficient wood, and also the surrounding areas like the lava and Tomato Temple and such I don't think are going to be contested, so you really just have a very high likelihood of getting a large amount of loot to your trio. So what I'd recommend is mostly just to farm the metal that you can, and then obviously get the wood pallets and make a quick rotation over to Tomato Temple so that you can farm your brick out and also just hit the nearby trees to max out your wood. And then for rotating out, you obviously have vents that you can use just to hit a slipstream, and you'll pretty much be in the clear. The next drop I want to talk about will be Loot Lake. Loot Lake generally suffers from just being too wide and having the chests too spread out for it to fully be looted. So even though it has 31 chests, it's not viable for a duo to completely loot everything without wasting time and being rotated into. However, the presence of a third team member will be able to negate that, so you'll be able to get pretty good wood from the trees that spawn and like this forest as well as this row of trees. You'll be able to get max metal from hitting the fences and just the outpost walls and such. And then you can get brick from hitting like this top railing on these buildings and the top railing on that building, as well as some rocks in here. And if you're able to with the zone, then you can also hit over here for the quarry, since I don't believe that players will be looting this, since generally this gets looted by baller players who land here. But since there's only 6 baller spawns here, I don't know if trios are going to be wanting to risk that, as well as the fact that there's not a lot of loot for them to get in the first place as a duo nor a solo, so I especially don't think it'll be viable for a trio. I'd recommend that if you're being contested to try to send all 3 members to these buildings, since this area has less total loot for a trio and is pretty much the only other viable area. And if you were to isolate yourself and send one to Modern perhaps, then the players here could just quickly catch onto the slipstream and goon this player before you guys have the opportunity to finish looting and help. If you want to base your drop pretty much on the sheer amount of loot you can get, then Tilted is obviously your best bet. It's got 3 vendings and 34 chest spawns, so you're pretty much guaranteed to have your whole trio kitted out pretty well. And also the walls are primarily made of metal, so you'll for sure be maxed out on that. You can get trees for wood and shrubs, which yield a decent amount. I'm not sure if you'll get maxed out for a whole trio, but you'll definitely have a sufficient amount to just pick up the rest walking around the map. If you want brick, then it's a little bit difficult to find. These walls are the Continental. Give brick. You can get brick on this slipstream holder, I suppose, as well as the rocks nearby. And then you can also get brick with some of the walls on this side of Tilted. I'd recommend trying to plan this out beforehand, since it's really confusing which walls give brick and metal, since they literally look the exact same. The last area I want to talk about is going to be Paradise Palms. I find that even though you're contested semi-frequently, the main issue you worry about is that you're going to be third-partied by people who land mini junk or the John Wick house. However, I don't think that that's going to be happening as frequently in trios, since neither of these places support a trio very well, and if a trio decides to land out one, then they won't be fully kitted. Also, if they do a split, sending like 1 here and 2 here, then it's possible that they risk other players landing and sending like multiple players to the John Wick house or multiple players to mini junk, so it's an inherent risk for them. If they try to do another plan, such as sending 3 here and then using the quads to go to mini junk, then they're using quads, and I already talked about that. Therefore, I think that the loot you'll get at Paradise, and ideally if you get zone, mini junk as well as John Wick, will be uncontested, so you'll be leaving pretty kitted. One honorable mention spot that I want to talk about is going to be the Dusty Divot Dusty Diner combo. The thing to keep in mind is that you definitely want to be sending your members here, since Dusty Diner can't really support a trio, so they're pretty much forced to push into a divot pretty much every time, since there's no good surrounding loot as well. So what you'll want to do is have one person sitting on the main top area and maybe one on this right side of the gate, so that once they come down you can get like easy beams here, or like from this player here, like just being aware that these players will be wanting to push 9 out of 10 times. Another negative I had about this area was that the amount of floor loots are relatively low, so since combat shotguns don't really spawn out of chests reliably, you're generally going to pick one up off of the floor if anything, and just the low lack of floor loots as well as the low lack of ammo between this area isn't going to be very sustainable for a trio in my opinion. The good thing about this area is obviously how efficiently you can get your wood and metal, as well as the fact that the nearby mushrooms can easily get one member of your trio to 100 shield by itself. And also you can get your brick at the floor of the diner. The one thing I'd recommend for if you're farming the diner is to have one person set up a 1x1 on top of this diner, so that other players will be turned off from trying to run up on you guys, and maybe if they were looking to farm the diner as you guys are, then they'll see that it's occupied and won't be trying to come anymore. So whilst this player can sit on this 1x1 and scout the area, then just have the 2 players inside this diner just farm up enough surplus mats for this person to get to 500 as well. Although this takes longer, the fact that Dusty Divot's pretty much in the center of the map and has a really close slipstream nearby means that any zone, the first zone that's going to close, generally won't be pushing you guys too far out, so you'll have abundant time to be farming. That pretty much wraps up my video on what I think are going to be viable spots for trios. So if you enjoyed this style of content, then leave a like and subscribe. Thank you.